on my phone, I found this video and I almost deleted it. It is of that doodle I put with the video about sewing into your art journal. So I had this print and I wrote on it, and of course it's mirror writing, and then I went back and started doodling over the top. I'd originally stained it with coffee and left it on one of my plant stands, and so it has all these markings. And what I've done is gone back and started to trace around them, and of course it's becoming flowers. It probably becomes something else too. And then I'm using my typical ballpoint pen that I use all the time. So this pen has been with me through everything, and I'm using it to just scumble and add textures. So it makes my heart happy. This little scrap of a print has actually set in a box of just other scraps for about, 6 months or more, and it's just been waiting for me to pull it out. So I felt like it was the perfect time. And what I've begun to really enjoy doing is I write, and then I go back and I draw over the top, and then I go back and add more. And sometimes I write more and sometimes I don't. Right now, I'm just coloring in around the little markings that the coffee made. And if you're wondering about the verse, what it says is, "Blessed is she who believed, for there will be a fulfillment of those things which were told her from the Lord." And that is Luke 1:45. So I just recently started journaling Bible verses into my art journals. For years, I struggled with depression, and journaling and art has always gotten me out of it. And this is my way of taking the next step and seeing hope in the future. So every day I sit down and I work a little bit. And it may be about 5 minutes, and it may be about 2 hours. Usually it is up at 3 a.m. doing this. And Jay's usually asleep on his perch. Right now he is hanging out in the shower. He loves the shower. I want to say hi. This is his towel. He loves his towel. He likes to look at himself in the shine too. I just put paper underneath him and he just hangs out. He doesn't even care if I'm in here. Hey, buddy. So back to this. I probably should have posted that printing press video, but I had to put it together and it just seemed like so much effort. So I'm just going to talk you guys through this one instead, and then I'll post that other one next week. This right here is just a cheap ballpoint pen that I happen to have fallen in love with, that I found on the floor of my classroom. There is no telling where it came from. It just ended up on the floor. Nobody claimed it, so I adopted him. And now I'm using him to outline and trace. It is very juicy, black ink, and it happens to be water soluble. So what I've done and figured out is that I can take my paintbrush and I can go around the edges of the ink, and over time, see what's happening? It's starting to bleed out. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. And I've begun to use this technique on many other things. Now, it works with other pens too. If they are water soluble, honey, they will bleed. And so it is great. It used to be something I really did not like when I was using pens, and now I actually use it as a technique. It's like a way to do watercolor without actually investing in watercolor. So I just take the paintbrush after I've already drawn the lines and I dip it in a little water and I just go around the edges. Now, you can't really control it, and sometimes it goes where you don't want it to, but if you can just keep the water where you want the ink to possibly go, it will kind of semi-stay put. It's really lovely. You have to kind of remember, though, that if you drag the water further out, the ink will follow. If you're process-oriented and love to enjoy each moment of the process and slow down and take time, you will probably enjoy watching that ink bleed out over the course of a few minutes. So you can see where the paper is still wet and the ink has started to bleed. What's really nice too is see how I'm drawing back on the dry areas, and then I can draw back into the wet areas and it will bleed out still. So if I touch that pen on a wet area, wherever I've touched it, it will start to bleed. So you can have like a little bit of duality going on with the feathery bleed of the ink, and then also in the dry area, more precise. Sometimes it's really hard for me to stop. And looking back, I kind of wish I had left it like this, but no, I kept touching it and touching it more. And so things got busier. My brain is really busy, and so my art tends to be really busy, which in turn helps calm me down. But whatever. I have a video to go back on, but it sure was fun making that ink bleed out. And that's exactly what I'm doing right here, which works really good if you like to create layers to your art. One thing that I've started to do, well, actually, I've done it the past, oh gosh, about 10 years, is that I take one piece of art and as it's drying, I work on another piece of art. So this is that teeny tiny little sketchbook. And as this was drying, I worked on that. And now I'm adding gouache again. But so, I probably should have used the gouache more opaque, but I didn't. And so now I'm going back in and adding more layers on top of the gouache just to make it brighter. And then when it dries, I go back in with the pen and I go between all the little cracks. So now we're back to adding details. It's almost like carving back in the darks and pushing all the cracks darker, because when you lay watered down gouache or watercolor or acrylic over the top of a darker drawing, you have these lovely mid-tone values that pop up. So I'm going back and just tracing some of them, tracing some of those little details I thought were too dark, and then they got dulled down by the gouache, and now I'm adding back in certain ones to make those darker. So you have a lovely variation of value from light to dark. I probably have two favorite parts of drawings. The first initial envisioning, you see it on the page before you even make a mark and you start sketching out, and then the final details. Of course, where we're at the point in this one, these aren't the final details. I'm going to go ham on it and keep on adding more. What I've decided to do is add more around the middle area of this other side of the page. But the problem I'm finding is that it's starting to get kind of jumbled looking and dark, and I'm losing my leaves. I'm losing all the textures and the contrast between the lightest lights and the darkest darks. And this is usually at the point I decide, I'll turn this into a background for something else. And so I kept on adding, and it just got more jumbled as I went. So what I did, I added color. This is a water-soluble, just a dip pen ink. I really like it. It doesn't drop out of the dropper very much, but you really don't, that was Jay, you really don't have to use very much. It's this lovely green, and popping some color in on those leaves is going to start to help them come back out from the background. Yeah, that's Jay laughing. So this is at the point where I'm like, it's starting not to look so great. So why not add more? So now I'm adding brown ink, and I don't know if I really like it, but I might as well stick with it and keep on going. And I keep on going, thinking if I just push through and come out the other side, it will turn out. And that's usually how I roll on most of my stuff. If I just keep on going, I can always turn it into a ground. I keep telling myself that, going through that jumbled up area, and I'm trying new things, knowing I can't erase it, but I can keep piling stuff on. And in a pinch, I can take that gouache and go back over the top. This is just brown ink, and I'm adding it in, and it's like, I don't know if I like that brown, but we're going to keep on going. Might as well tap some on the side and then go back in with that gouache and start reclaiming some highlights. If I had used the gouache more opaquely, it would have not sunk into the paper as much, and I wouldn't have to keep on adding my highlights back in. But I kind of like doing it where it's a little watered down, because then the watercolor can be seen through it and I can build up my layers and my values. And I always turn my paper all which way as I work, because I like to pull it close to me. And I'm adding more, knowing that if I go back on the top again, it will dissolve. So all of this stuff, I'm adding more. I keep on building up that gouache, and it keeps on sinking in, but I'm just enjoying the process, and so it really doesn't matter. He's laughing. The past week or so, I've been trying to integrate my iridescent watercolors back into doodles and journaling, and the first ones I did a little bit. This one, I started to pack it on, because when you see that shine, you're like, oh, this is beautiful. And before I know it, I am just overloading it, and it's kind of taken over. And I'm thinking, I don't know, but I keep on adding more. But what's really nice is taking the brush and making it really liquidy and letting it bleed, just like that ink. And I've used the brush to help bleed out that ink more and then run it down the side. So it's a little bright, and as I'm tapping it, I'm thinking. So it's buying me some time. I probably can either wipe it off, or maybe I'll wash it off. First, we're going to try to wipe it off. And it is not working. So I just washed it off. I ran it under the sink and look at that. This is much more me. Well, if I've already washed it, I figure, well, why not blow dry it too? It'll get the whole treatment. So, oh my gosh, this is so much better. And now that it's dry, I'm using my actual dip pen and I'm adding in some really lovely, teeny tiny dark details. So this is just black ink and oh, it's looking good. I'm liking it a lot better. So you can see the writing underneath that dark area, that blue, and then you can see the ink bleeding out. It's starting to look like layers, and that's kind of what I was going for. So it just took a roundabout way of getting there, which is a-okay. Back to my ballpoint pen again. I like the subtlety of the ballpoint pen a little bit more for this, and so I've made the switch back and going back in and reclaiming some dark details that I had lost. Remember how I said I really loved going back in and adding in those details? Well, because of my oops with the iridescent watercolors, I'm able to do it all over again. That's okay. I didn't get upset. I didn't get mad. The only person who was really going to originally see this was me, and so it really didn't matter. But now it's starting to look ghosty with all the different layers added in and then washed off. So this is just drawing paper. It probably should not have made it through this process. I'm kind of rough on my paper, but I want that weathered look. I highly recommend you trying it. I think this might be 80-pound or 70-pound drawing paper, so it's really not that thick, but apparently it was thick enough if you do choose to wet it to try this method of washing off your stuff. You have to be very gentle with it. But once it's dry, it goes back to being pretty much kind of strong again, and I can add more stuff. So popping thicker gouache for the highlights, and then, I might be close to being done. In the past, I've worked with bleed-proof white on my dip pens, and I also use it to paint, but I really like the creaminess of the gouache for using with a paintbrush. So this might be my new favorite water-soluble white paint to use in my art journals. But, oop, we have a little stray hair. So here's a little trick for when you're working with paintbrushes and then get one or two little stray hairs. You see that? It's kind of hard to see on the video. But don't pull it. It will come out of the ferrule and probably pull its friends. So what you do is you take your scissors, you slide over the hair, and you just clip the little hair off. And, oop, I think we're good to go. This is not an expensive paintbrush. It is one that I've had for a while, and its hairs are kind of going crazy every once in a while. So when one pokes out, I just clip it off, and it works just fine. So let's just be real for a second. To me, it's more important to be able to afford to do art than it is to have the best of the best. So I will spend money on things that are very important to me, like really good oil paints or really good watercolor paints. And then depending on what I'm doing, I may buy an expensive brush. And then if it's something for like an art journal or something that is just for me to play with, I probably don't, because you know what? I'm kind of rough on them. So if you are worried about using really expensive items, especially expensive brushes, honestly, it's more important just to paint, just to art. Now, there's a time to splurge and there's time not to. If you're on a budget, you can do so much with whatever's in your hand just because it is your creativity that pushes that tool, that instrument. So I tell my students all the time, do not worry about buying the best of the best. The point is to get started. And as you get going, as a prize, treat yourself, but don't let that be the holdup for getting started. And I'm laughing on the inside as I say this because my expensive brushes, I always get on clearance. I get them all the time, half off or more on clearance at art stores, so I hunt. I've even found some at flea markets, so you don't have to buy them brand new. And that goes for expensive art supplies too. But I could talk about art supplies all day long, so let's get back to this. And we're almost done. So pop in a few more highlights with the gouache, and then I really keep thinking about these little dots and speckles I see other people doing. So I'm going to try some. And just little dots, going in and adding little dots around the words and also into the blue. A few of my dots got a little bigger than I wanted, but I kept on going. I'm not going to worry about it. I can't undo them, so might as well keep going. And then I might have gone and added a little too many, but that's kind of normal for me. So that's okay. If you haven't tried it, you might want to try turning your paper as you work. It helps bring it closer to you, and you're able to reach all the little details and really focus in on them. And it gives you a new perspective of what you're creating. Well, I think we're going to call it good for now. It doesn't need any more. Goodness, it doesn't. Let's call it done. And you can see the watercolor did seep through on the back on both sides. That is a-okay. We're just going to leave it a little ghosty. But thank you so much for joining me. I really have appreciated you being here. And if you made it this far, thank you for keeping me company as I relived this art piece. But yep, this will go in my art journal. And now it's time to start another.